Persons of Presence, we're coming at you with a super special episode. I met our guest, Rachel Gertie Dean, following a fantastic free-flowing cross-country journey this summer, and within the meeting her, I knew I had to have her on the show. I could not be happier with the outcome. Rachel has lived a life that really shows what it means to be guided by one's heart and intuition, and has developed a whole career around helping others consciously heal and mindfully manifest. Please grab some tissues, as we have shed more than a couple tears during the recording of this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy. Hi friends, I'm Zach Nomadic, and this is Persons of Presence. This week our guest is Rachel Gertie Dean, founder and owner of Lotus, which is a yoga, art, and wellness studio. She also has a master's degree in art therapy and is a practicing art therapist. I met Rachel a few weeks ago, actually about a month ago, upon showing up in Oakland, Oregon to interview one of my other guests, and within 2 hours of arriving ended up at her farm for a farm to table potluck, and had a wonderful night. Met some awesome people out here in this rather tiny town. I feel blessed that I met the top 1% of just awesome people, because everybody there was very mindful and some great wisdom and experience to share. And upon meeting Rachel, I knew that I had another guest for this show, and so I asked her to join us, and here we are. And if I seem a little zenned out, it's just because we did one of her chakra meditations. So thank you for joining us today, Rachel. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's exciting to be here. This is my first one ever, my first podcast.
Awesome. It's my fifth.
Okay.
So, well, actually, I was on one before starting hosting my own. But I'm happy to have you here for your first podcast, and excited to learn a little bit more about you and what really drives you. So, on that note, I'm trying to figure out, well, how about art therapy? So, what started that?
Okay. Well, I have kind of an unusual childhood.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that unusual to grow up on a farm. I grew up on a farm, but I grew up in a very extremely religious home. It's a sect of Christianity, which actually doesn't even have a name.
Oh.
But it's what
Is it just a noise?
Right. Well, it's like a little bit Amish mixed with Baptist. Very, very strict. We met in people's homes. But growing up that way, I wasn't allowed to wear makeup, cut my hair, pierce my ears, tattoos. I wasn't allowed to watch television. So I was, in a way, kind of cut off from society. And also, growing up in a really, really, really small town, you have like a limited amount of experiences. So from a very early age, like your typical kid would be watching cartoons on Saturday morning. I was reading books and drawing from like the minute I could hold a crayon. So that's where the art therapy started, I would say. From early childhood, I was just always creating, drawing. I wanted to do something with art in my life.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe someday, I'd be like an illustrator or own an art gallery. And so I actually went to college, but at the time my dad was funding school. And over the course of the years, my parents started to loosen up and their religious beliefs started to shift. And so slowly but surely I started, I could go to movies when I was in high school, which was a really big deal. It was crazy, I'd go to the movie theater for the first time. Or to sneak over to a friend's house and watch TV. Yeah. I felt really bad, but... So anyways, I slowly started to basically assimilate into regular society. When I moved to college, I had to teach myself how to parallel park.
Yeah.
I couldn't even do that. So anyways, my parents were funding school for me, and they wanted me to get a degree that was like a real degree, right?
Yeah.
You gotta get a job in the real world or whatever. So I studied business for 3 years. And I actually started college a year early because my senior year, I was like done with school, and so I was a little bit ahead of the game, which was helpful, but the third year in, my heart like just wasn't in it, like this whole business school thing, and it just wasn't my passion, it wasn't my purpose or just my calling,
Yeah.
And so I had this like really, really intense moment where I went to the what are they called? The like advisor, right? And he was this old dude, and I'm like, I'm not feeling the degree. I kind of want to explore art. That's like my thing. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, "How old are you?" And at the time, I think I was 19, because I started college early, so I was pretty young. And he's like, "Yeah, your age, and you're a girl. Most girls drop out of business school right now because it's too hard." And I couldn't believe my ears. I was just like, what?
Yeah.
Can I say asshole on podcast?
Yes, definitely. Sounds like one.
Fucking asshole.
You can't say fucking though. Oh. No, I'm just joking.
Because I cuss like a sailor. So I was like shaking. I was so angry that he said that to me. I didn't even have words to say back. I just stood up and walked out of the office. I was in shock. And I, in that very instant, was like, no, this is when my life changes. And I walked across campus, and it was like at the way other end of campus, and the buildings kind of run down, the art building.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of kids hanging out, smoking cigarettes, and I was like, I went right in, and they actually had an opening with the advisor there, which, normally you're supposed to schedule an appointment. Yeah. She had a 2-minute opening to talk to me, and she said, "Honey, we'll get you signed up right now."
Wow, a pivotal 2 minutes right there.
It was. But it's like a moment I would never change in my life.
Yeah.
It was really special, and it suddenly gave me this little piece of power.
Yeah.
It was like, no, you can't tell me how my life is going to be.
Yeah.
And even I love my parents, but they wanted to push me in this direction, and it just wasn't the right one for me. And I had to kind of pull back, make an assessment on myself, and realize, what do I want out of life?
Yeah.
So that's what started the art major, which took me another 4 years of school.
Yeah. Which
was good I started early, because then I was about on time after that.
Yeah.
But through that process, I had some pretty big difficulties with my family. I was
because of that change.
Yeah, the funding quit, the support quit, and I really had to figure a lot of things out really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, a bunch of other weird stuff happened in my life. I had a roommate over spring break. I went home to go hiking, and I came back early, and all her stuff was gone. It looked like someone had ransacked her side of the apartment.
Yeah.
So first I thought we got burglarized, and I'm like a little bit freaked out. Then I realized, no, she'd like had her stuff packed and left. So I knew she'd like fallen in love with this guy, and it was like moving really quickly, and I thought maybe they like ran off together. Cool.
Yeah.
And this is back in the day where like hardly anybody had a cell phone. So I still have the like answering machine in my apartment. And I see the red light beeping, so I go over and check it, and she's like, she left me a message. She's like, "Rachel, send me the rest of my stuff. It's an emergency." And I'm like, so then I'm thinking, maybe, okay, what's going on? Long story short, my roommate at the time went home over spring break, went to a doctor's appointment, and discovered that she had like one of the final stages of cancer. And so that was kind of a huge shift for me as well in college, because all these big, beautiful things were happening in my life, and I was really taking charge of my life, on my pathway studying art, and then my roommate gets really sick, drops out of college. She survived though. She went through the treatment. She did very well, and it was just another, shift in my
Yeah.
life. And then I had to find a new roommate, which was also a crazy story.
Share worthy for a podcast?
I guess so. Well, because it just kind of all leads to my story, I guess.
Definitely.
So I get this other roommate just like on a whim. I'm like, I need someone to help pay the rent, right?
And what are you using at this time to find a new roommate?
Just word of mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was at the little coffee shop at the college, and I ran into a very loose old friend that I'd had. And so she moved in with me, thankfully, helping pay the rent. But literally the first weekend she lived there, she went to stay with her boyfriend. And I get a knock on the door downstairs. So it was like I rented the top part of a house, and you had to go to the side porch and go up the stairs, and then you got to our little apartment. And so I hear this knock downstairs. I'm thinking, oh, it's my roommate. Maybe she forgot something. I go down, wrapped up in my blankie, and there are 10 police officers outside my door with guns drawn. Like it was serious.
Yeah.
And they were looking for my new roommate. So immediately, I had to ask her to leave because she had been faking credit cards. She'd racked up $100,000 of bills and then put fake signatures claiming they'd been stolen, but it was her doing it the whole time.
Yeah.
So they were there to arrest her.
Could you tell, by, her belongings and her lifestyle that she was racking in all this money?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was like, whoa, how are you affording all this really nice stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm on my own, scrimping pennies to go get a McDonald's cheeseburger in college,
Yeah.
So she refused to move out. And I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? I was so determined, Zach, crazy determined to make my life path work, right? But I'm starting to feel like, what is the universe doing? They just keep sending me these hiccups, and they're big ones. Well, at the time I was teaching swimming lessons. I was a lifeguard swim instructor for 5 years, and it was really fun. Always worked with super cool people.
Awesome.
And one of the girls that I worked with just randomly is like, oh man, I'm gonna quit. I just found this super great job in an apartment complex. And I was like, really? Tell me about that. And so it turns out she got all her rent paid. All she had to do was show a couple apartments every once in a while when they became vacant, and rent them and fill out some paperwork. And she was like, it's super easy and I can still go to college. And I'm thinking, man, that's the dream job, right? So I'm starting to look in the newspapers. Gosh, I don't even think they had Craigslist then. I'm feeling really old.
Craigslist is probably about a decade old at this point, right?
Yeah, because this was right before 9/11 also.
Yeah.
Which also was a big shift in my life. So I'm looking in the paper, I find an ad, and I'm shaking going to this interview. This is this big CEO guy coming down from Portland, and this little country bumpkin girl trying to make it as an artist. And
now, is this in Eugene, or where is this at?
It's in Corvallis. I went to the Oregon State.
Cool.
So I go to the interview, and I'm shaking the whole time. I'm so nervous. And at the end, he's just like, well, I don't even need to interview anyone else. And he had a whole day of interviews scheduled, but I was the first person that called. Yeah. I was the first interview, and he goes, you got the job.
Nice.
Oh, I was like, hallelujah. So I got to move out of the apartment that, my old roommate wouldn't leave. And I kind of did that over a weekend while she wasn't there, and just got out of there, informed the landlords of what was going on, kind of let them deal with it.
Yeah.
And I got a brand new 2-bedroom apartment all to myself, rent paid, plus I got a salary on top of that to pay for school.
There you go.
I mean, I had no bills.
Yeah.
It was awesome. That's awesome. I sold my car too to make a little extra money, and I bicycled everywhere. But, I was in great shape, and just no bills and doing the life. So it was funny. Sometimes I think we feel like the universe is sending us hiccups or bumps that are just impeding the path we want to be on.
Yeah.
But ultimately, maybe it's opening up a new pathway that's even better.
Definitely.
If we like allow that process to happen.
Yeah.
But it's really scary when you're in the process. Sometimes you can't have that vision to see where you're headed.
Yeah, and it's different than, I mean, if you have expectations, which it's difficult to not to, you know, we're kind of conditioned to have these goals and expectations, and then whenever things go differently, then we look at that as a bad thing. But I'd agree, and honestly, after every episode of this podcast, you know, there's been a direct correlation with these difficulties serving as the opportunities and like stepping stones to the next, you know, the next path.
Right.
So.
Or just clarifying your path. You know?
Yeah.
So that really helped me kind of get super set up at that point, and I was really able to dive into my art and start to process my life as a child. And I had to do a lot of processing about the religion I was raised in. And so I started doing really my own art therapy on myself. And I actually started journaling when I was in the 4th grade. I was 8 years old, and I had a neighbor whose older sister I really looked up to, and she was doing a journaling project. I thought she was so cool. So I decided to start my own little journal. And then at that time also, we went to visit my great-grandmother in the summer between 4th and 5th grade. So I'd already been journaling a little bit, but you know, an 8-year-old, it's not like mega serious journaling.
Yeah.
It's like 2 sentences, like, I saw a cat today. It's like really, really cute to look back on it. But the summer right before the 5th grade, we went to visit my great-grandmother, who was in very late stages of dementia. And it's funny, she would call me Gertie, but she thought I was her childhood friend, Gertie, which is my middle name.
Yeah.
And it was kind of humorous at the time, but then this sort of layer of seriousness hit me after we left, and I started to talk with my mom about what this meant and what was going on with great-grandma. And it actually really scared me when I started to learn how genetic dementia was. And then later when I was in college, my grandmother also got the early stages, or very early onset, like in her 60s. And she was so sweet. She would write me letters in college, and you could just see her handwriting changing, letters being mixed up, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't elderly age. She was in her 60s.
Yeah.
So I've actually been religiously journaling my life, my art, poetry, writing, whatever, since 1989.
Wow.
To this day. And I have probably 40 journals filled.
Wow.
Like page to page. The high school ones are insane. I want to burn them,
Yeah.
but I won't. And then as the years progress, the journaling gets much more artistic. Sometimes I don't even write. I just draw a picture about how I'm feeling that day. And
it's awesome.
so that to share that story, I'm tying in more of the reason why I became an art therapist.
Yeah.
For my own personal healing, but also art was documenting my life in the hopes that if someday I go down that genetic path of having dementia, maybe they can study my journals and find, you know, some helpful research in that.
Yeah, I mean, and just keeping the tool sharp, your mind, you know, consistently using that. You know, a lot of times whenever we take in information, we may just have that initial exposure to it, but if we take the time to actually integrate it or, you know, articulate it in our own words, we further ingrain it in our psyche. So it's something that's, you know, we carry with us longer, and it's more foundational in our existence moving forward. So I think it's awesome. And so how does your journaling practice occur? Is it does it take place at the same time every day? Do you have any rituals leading into that?
Well, right now, not so much, because I have a 4 and 5 year old. Right now, journaling literally looks like breaking out the crayons and watercolors, and the kids will journal with me. So my journaling process has changed in the different phases of my life.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Like in high school, it was like a lot of ranting and raving about that girl at school that said my shirt was ugly. It was like not cool. I mean, seriously, that's what you write about when you're a teenager. Or, oh my God, I'm like so in love with this guy, you know. Just pages and pages of it.
Yeah.
And college is where it started to shift, and especially since I was studying art, things became much more artistic and creative, and I spent a lot of times at coffee shops or even going to bars, and I was like that person in the corner just drawing, going to the park, drawing other people. And then in between college and graduate school is where it became like intensely therapeutic. And I would do meditation, art. My art's it's just sort of clicked with whatever phase in life I'm in. Also kind of back to my roommate who got sick. That was the first time I did what I call a prayer painting. I made my own frame, which was like, it was like as tall as this ceiling here. It was like a 12-foot painting by like 5 foot. And I had to borrow someone's van and like strap it to the top of the van and like take it to the art studio. And I just started painting, thinking about my roommate that I loved and that she was ill, and just putting all this intention into the painting for her healing. It was therapeutic for me, but it was also meant to be a prayer for her.
Yeah. That's awesome.
It was intense.
It's kind of like a vision board, but, you know, I mean, it is very much like a vision board. You're setting your intentions on paper. And had you heard about that from someone, or is that something that just kind of came to you?
It just came to me. Yeah. And it helped me through that process. And then actually when I found that she had gotten completely better, I burned the painting. It felt like it was just time to release all the energy and be done with it.
Interesting. So I had noticed a trend here. You started art because you were kind of cut off from the real world, right, in a sense. So you were creating your own world. And it sounds, you know, the prayer painting as well, it's a lot of intuition and creation of what you'd like to see. Do you ever use it? I mean, I guess in a sense journaling is processing the real world and is less intuitive. Do you flip from both sides? I don't know if that question makes sense, but
I think it makes sense. And definitely I do.
Yeah.
I do use art as a tool for manifestation, but I also use it as a tool to process, you know, my past, present, future. So yeah, I do use it both ways, and I teach other people to use it that ways. I mean, most people already know about vision boards. And I meet with clients here privately, and we do art therapy here in the studio. And most recently I did a vision board, and you know, I think sometimes clients can struggle when you say like, let's do a vision board, let's manifest, you know, whatever you want in your life. They're like, whoa, like where do I even start? So I broke it down into categories, and you can use all the categories or you can just use some, like whatever pertains to you. And I let people use collaged images or photographs. You can look up anything you want on the internet, print it off, draw whatever you want, write whatever word you want. So you get specifically the images and words that you're wanting to manifest, because the saying, you know, what's the saying, like,
you find what you're looking for.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yes, okay.
Because it will happen.
Yeah.
So I really emphasize that at the beginning. And then, you know, the categories are your main categories, like family, social life, relationships, money, jobs, you know, your personal health, wealth, spirituality, all those big categories. And then under those categories, we start with a free writing to get clarified in our own minds. And then after the free writing, you find the images to put on your vision board that reflect that free writing. That's the process I teach.
I love it.
And, oh gosh, I've manifested a lot in my life. Yeah, it's a very real tool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've done a series over the years of different types of, top-down visualizations from life goals to tomorrow's goals. And it's funny because now every time I go back to look at my old ones, I'm literally doing everything with the exception of owning a plane and a few things, but those are coming.
Oh my God, owning a plane, I love it.
But just especially the lifestyle stuff. I now have all the time, and I do apply it in all the places that I've always said I'd love to be able to have regular adrenaline peaking experiences outdoors, and that's something that's everywhere I go. But yes, I definitely am a big believer and proponent of visualization. So whenever you go into the free writing, is there any questions or kind of guiding statements that help the users of this practice really find their intuitive intentions? Because sometimes it's really easy to just grab onto this is what everybody else wants, so I'm going to write it down, rather than being more true to thyself.
Absolutely, but it's very, it's not cookie cutter. It's not here's a worksheet you take home and do. I work one-on-one with a person, so it's a very private experience, so you don't have to worry about a group of people doing one.
Yeah.
And I also try to be hands-off. The Greek word that therapist is derived from is therapon, which just means to guide. And so when I meet with clients, that's my goal, is to act as a guide to them. I don't want to ask a question unless, organically it seems like the right time, So I do have those questions in my tool bag that I'll use, but oftentimes I want that person to intuitively do their own process. I don't want to guide them in any direction that maybe I'm headed. I want them to be their own guide. Yeah, definitely.
Especially if we feel like we're being directed, we may be more apprehensive to take those next steps. Whereas if you can help them ask the right questions to themselves, then...
Right, because really within ourselves is our own highest, master. And that's all I want to guide each person to. Their own higher master. Not any of my teachings, I'm blah, 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 No, it's what is your power? Where's your power at? You go that way.
Beautiful.
But I could share a story about one of my most powerful manifesting boards.
I'd love to hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
It led me to Peru.
All right.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but ever since I was a kid, I've already shared with you, I was always looking at books and drawing. And my mom got us these old Disney encyclopedias. And it was part Disney cartoon pictures and part super cool ancient mysteries. And I was way into it from the time I was a kid.
Which one more, Ancient Mysteries or Disney?
Ancient Mysteries. Okay. I was I don't care about Donald Duck. I want to read about the pyramids.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was the craziest set of books, but I just got way into all this ancient history. And I've always wanted to go to the pyramids. Anytime I travel, I have to go to the most sacred archaeological site, see it, feel it, be there. And so basically the number one spot on my list was Machu Picchu. I have always wanted to go. It's it calls me, So at this point in my life, I'm in my early 30s, and I'd been practicing as an art therapist in Portland for quite some time, about 8 years. And it was just very intense work. When I was doing art therapy there, I was working with children who basically had the highest level of trauma that you can experience. And after 8 years of that, it does start to wear on you, whether you're using all the tools in your box or not. It's intense work.
Yeah.
And I started to feel called to come home. which I was like, whoa, why? This is like my whole life I wanted to get out of here. I burned rubber out of here.
Yeah.
And then I'm feeling called to come home. So at the time I was also really into neuroscience, and I went to this convention, and this like really brand new program was starting called the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, short NMT. What's our time?
Oh, 30 minutes, we're good.
Okay, cool.
I was just making sure we're recording right now.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I went to hear this guy, Bruce Perry, and I'd read his book, and I was obsessed with him. And it was a conference for like, I don't know, probably 3,000 people were there. It was a lot of people. And I'm just like way into the speaker. He's like the head, Dr. Bruce Perry. He developed NMT, and it's all about how the brain works after being traumatized.
Gotcha.
And I'm very, I have my foot in the scientific clinical world, and I have another foot in the spiritual, ethereal world as well. So I go back and forth.
Yeah.
And so I was way into learning about the brain, taking notes like crazy, and just like in love with this guy. Everything he says is so spot on with my clients I'm working with. And then we take a break, and at these things, it's always nice to meet new people, meet a new therapist, a doctor, a psychologist, network, You're always needing to refer clients to other people.
Gotcha.
For other levels of help. So I'm looking around the room, and I also have this particular practice. I don't know if everyone does this, and maybe this is crazy, but I don't even know when I started it. Anyways, I look around the room, and I try to find the person that I think is literally the most powerful person in the room. I look around, and I see the person with the most confidence, good energy, and I decide, if I have limited time, I'm going to go to that person first and talk to them and hear what they have to say, because I bet they have some things to teach me.
Yep. It sounds like an effective tool.
It is. Yeah. It is. As long as you can spot the right person, right? In fact, it's funny. Usually when I go places, I immediately talk to the owner of the place. And it's like just not...
with that intention, or are you just always kind of seem to pick them out?
Yeah, it's not conscious.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because I've been practicing it a while, now I just do it. So I'm looking around, and I look over at this woman who literally she is like radiatingly beautiful. Like, she looks like Goldie Hawn. She is like, I don't see auras or anything, but if I did, it was like sparkles of gold coming out of her. She was just like majestic, and I thought, that is the woman I have to talk to. So I just walked straight over. I cut through people, pushed people out of my way. I don't care.
Mission.
I go to meet her, and she is the owner of a nonprofit, of course, and works with traumatized children. And we had a bunch of similarities right at the beginning. I was planning a trip to go to Sedona, and she goes to Sedona every year.
Yeah.
We started talking about chakras and hiking to, sacred places in Arizona. And finally, at the end of our conversation, she just very nonchalantly mentions she has a very large nonprofit here in Roseburg, and she's looking for a new therapist. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? Because Roseburg's, right next door to this town. And I've been feeling called to move back here, and my mind's just blown. And I'm like, well, I'm headed to Sedona, but before I go, how about I drive down and check out your facility? And she's like, great. So I come down, I walk around the facility, and literally at the end of the tour, she offers me a job. I mean, things just started aligning like crazy.
Yeah, if that wasn't meant to happen, I don't know what was.
Right? Out of 3,000 people, that's the person I talked to, and she's looking for someone to work for her. I mean, it's just that universe stuff again. Once you set your intention, you have to be careful, because things start shifting and moving, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. And then at the time, I was in a relationship, and my partner was ending their job. So it was perfect time for them to leave. And on top of that, the old job they had offered to pay for us to move. So not only could we move down here, not pay anything, I have a job lined up.
So So they were leaving that job and they paid for you to move?
Yeah.
There you go.
Right? Yeah. That was part of his job. He got one complimentary move, whether he worked for them or not. So he was actually leaving the Marines.
Gotcha.
And then also my parents called me and they said, hey, we've got this rental house and the people just moved out. We don't know what to do.
Of course they did.
At this point, Zach, you're just like, really? Okay, like I have to move back.
Yeah.
Like the universe is again shouting at me.
Yeah. And okay, before we get too much further on this, have you always felt these sort of callings, like, the synchronicities, the everything aligning? Okay, cool.
But when I don't, I know I'm not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Synchronicity for me is just confirmation that I'm in alignment.
On your highest path.
On my highest path.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So I moved back. I had about a week off, which was perfect. I unpacked, got the house really tidy and organized, and went on a little sacred hike up Tyee Mountain, which they claim it's the mountain right behind the Lighthouse Bakery over there.
Okay, yeah.
They claim that originally this whole valley was covered in many groups of Native Americans, and they claim that many ceremonies were held on Tyee Mountain. And I know the people that live at the base of it, so I got permission to hike up.
And that's a commune, right?
There is an ashram.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And back then you could go and get tours of the ashram, but I think it's closed now to the public.
Gotcha.
But I went actually to a spot a little closer than the ashram's located, where there's like these big caves and rocks. And for whatever reason also, like, the cave always draws me when I'm in a particularly reflective time. I feel I have to go to caves.
Mm-hmm.
And, even when you meditate, it's like going into a cave, right?
Yeah.
So physically going to one is maybe just like,
it's a super power. Like
much more intense, right? The energy of the cave, the womb, the darkness, everything,
Yeah.
So I hiked up to Tyee, and then the next week I started my new job. Everything was going great. About a month into my new job, an old girlfriend emails me, and she's working on her PhD in art therapy down in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And she just found out about this big conference happening in Peru. And she goes, Rachel, I think we should apply to teach a class at this conference. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no way I would get accepted. At this point, I have been practicing for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a licensed clinical art therapist. I'm a clinical supervisor. I've got some notches under my belt.
Yeah.
But still, it's like an international conference. All the art therapists of the world will be there.
Yeah.
It's like a big deal. Intimidated. So I went home. And this is when I did one of my most powerful vision boards, and I did a collage, and I collaged the Machu Picchu in there. I put the actual, I got really specific. I put the actual brochure of the conference in the collage.
Mm-hmm.
I put writings down of what I would be saying in the class, projects I would be introducing to the classmates. I got very specific, as if I was memorializing something I'd already done.
Yeah.
So then came the funding, part. And I'm thinking, how am I going to fund this ticket? And the conference itself, even if you got accepted to teach, you still had to pay for it. And it was like $3,000. So it was an expensive trip.
Yeah.
And you really don't make that much in nonprofits.
Yeah.
So,
and when is this, timeline?
Early 30s.
Okay.
Early 30s. I just moved back here. And so I made this vision board, and I became really good friends with my coworker that was a grant writer. And she said, well, just start applying for grants. There are grants out there that fund people traveling for educational reasons. So I applied for about 5 grants, and so those were all sent out. And then I put together the class and applied to teach the class, and I just, am I going to get accepted? Oh my gosh. And when I got the letter that I'd been accepted, I was like jumping up and down. I couldn't believe it. So then I had to make a trip to Berkeley to visit my friend, of course.
Yeah.
So we could talk in person about the class, which was also another fun story.
So this is a joint class. It's you and your friend instructing. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
And we actually taught a class on mindfulness and art therapy practices and how to combine meditation, mindfulness, and art.
Awesome.
So that was really fun. So had a fun trip to Berkeley, still trying to figure out how to fund it, and it's literally about a week before the class, and I still didn't have the funds together.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, I just knew it would come into place. And I think also, as long as you're doing absolutely everything in your power to manifest what you're trying to manifest, sometimes other elements come in and help you out. And that's what happened. I had a private donor come to me and just write a check for the ticket.
That's awesome.
Again, just crying. So happy. So I get down to Peru, and I've got my whole budget, for the trip. And when I get to the conference, there's a misunderstanding, and my payment hadn't been made for the conference. I didn't have an extra $3,000, Zach.
Yeah.
I had everything.
And you didn't have that money in your account anymore.
Right. So there was some sort of misunderstanding, and I'm like sweating, like this is the first day of the trip. And so I go over to the other side booth to check in, and I'm pretty good at Spanish, but their Spanish is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, after even just like 3 minutes of struggling to talk to each other, she says, it's okay, come in. You're okay. And so we got that all worked out. And after that, just thing after thing started aligning on the trip. And it was really funny. So I met my girlfriend from Berkeley, and we shared a hostel room with one of her girlfriends also, who was working on her PhD. And the whole time I was thinking, man, this other girl just looks so familiar to me. Like, whoa. But she lives in Berkeley. I don't know how we would have ever met.
Yeah.
And she felt the same about me. So my two friends over there were Sylvia and Claire. And Claire was the one I just couldn't quite put my finger on. So about 3 days into the trip, we're in our hostel. She literally sits up in the middle of the night. Oh my God! Oh my God! And I'm like, what? Is there like a snake or a spider? Because we're like in Peru. You know? I'm like, what? And she's like, I know you. And I'm like, what? Where? And she's like, it's so funny. She's like, you remember that like heavy metal show in Portland? And I'm not into heavy metal. That's like not my scene. But I did go to one heavy metal show one time at a biker bar, and I was actually hired to photograph it. And she was performing in the middle of that show, doing like a fake ritual of like being stabbed to death. And she was topless. Yeah. And so in the middle of the night,
really knew her.
In Lima, Peru, I'm like, oh my God, you were the topless girl that was getting stabbed.
Yeah. That's nuts.
Again, you go across the world, and and crazy things still happen like that. And it's just, again, those little reminders that this is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's, I'm usually in a new city every 2 to 4 weeks, and somehow everywhere I go, I meet someone from the first place that I've really resonated with as home, which is St. Pete, Florida. And so I first kind of like stumbled upon it, well, without going too far back. I went there for a week in September last year, and then ended up there for 6 months. And it's just because I kept on running into people and things, and everything was, synchronistic and telling me to stay. And now everywhere I go around the country, I meet someone from St. Pete. Actually, I just met 2 people from St. Pete here in Oakland.
What?
Right next door at the Lamplighter.
Whoa.
On Friday. Yeah.
Wow.
So I know what you mean.
Yeah.
The more I travel, the more I realize, it's a small world.
It really is. It really is, yeah. So when I was in Peru, another thing we were trying to get to line up is I had been reading some books on alternative healing and using shamanic practices as well as ayahuasca.
Yep.
And I was definitely petrified of it. But I felt that if I was in Peru, where the root was grown, if the opportunity opened, I was going to take it.
Yeah.
And so my friend I was traveling with was studying underneath a guy who teaches at, it's called CIIS in Berkeley. It's like the College of Integral Studies, something along those lines. Very nice college. He was doing all his research on shamanism and psychedelics and healing trauma, which is, the field's been around since the 60s and 70s, but I don't think people have really been studying it that much, and there's a new resurgence of the studies.
Yeah.
I also have a friend who is in a group of clinical practitioners in Portland, and they're studying the effects of EMD.
Which is?
It's like basically a form of ecstasy.
Okay.
Like just like
Gotcha.
a pill, government-regulated pill
Okay.
form of ecstasy in order to overcome trauma. So
Yeah.
they're doing government studies. So things are starting to be studied, right?
Yeah.
And I just read this really cool book by Daniel Pinchbeck, who's a really good author, and it was called The Return of Quetzalcoatl 2012. And I was down in Peru in 2012. And so there's all these big theories about like the Mayan calendar ended that year. The planets are all basically in alignment. It was a huge shifting year for the Earth.
Yeah.
Many people believed, including me.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, like this would be the time to do it. But
And it is 2012 at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
2012. But I'm thinking, like, this isn't really my personality. Like, I'm a little scared, but still be open to it, Rachel. So this professor emails my friend while we're in Peru and says he's taken a trip to Peru. He's like a city away from us, like a short van ride away. And he's just met with a shaman who is hosting a ceremony the following, maybe 4 days from then, in our time frame. Perfect, because we had planned to hike Machu Picchu, come back. It would be it was like perfect timing.
Yeah.
So the process was really beautiful. He went and met with the shaman first, and we had just very
one-on-one or as a group?
We went as a group, so my 2 girlfriends went with me, and then about 5 or 6 other people joined, and we met at this really cool little vegan cafe, and she sort of gave us the rundown of what the ceremony would be like, and she took it very seriously.
Yeah.
So we had to abstain from alcohol, any drugs, meat. Didn't want to eat meat.
For how long ahead of time?
We had 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah. Ideally, it would be a week.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
But she said 4 days would be okay. She was going to give us an exception.
Yeah.
Especially with our travel plans. So at that point, we all started detoxing on our Machu Picchu trip. And in the meantime, we went by train, and the name of the town there is Caliente. The name Aguas Calientes.
Hot water.
The town is called Hot Water.
Yeah.
At the base of Machu Picchu, because it has many, many hot springs. Which was really cool. Beautiful murals of snakes and rainbows and crystals. I was in heaven there. I was just chakras everywhere.
Yeah.
I was just feeling all this radiating love everywhere. It was so beautiful. And dreaming intensely. So we ended up hiking Machu Picchu, and we decided to do all the way from the base of the trail up. You could go by bus up the road and then just hike around the site. It's quite a long trek.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 miles. And
each way.
Yeah. And all I had were cowboy boots. But I feel really proud to this day to say that I hiked Machu Picchu in cowboy boots.
Yeah. You did it in your element.
Yeah. But it was beautiful. Each step was the original trail that the ancient Incas would run up and down and deliver messages to the other pyramids and campsites. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So we hiked up. We did a wonderful meditation up at the top of Machu Picchu. And I mean, obviously you're like really high elevation, so you feel lightheaded. But then on top of that, to do a meditation was really, it felt very lifting. Like I felt like I was floating above the sky, way high above everything. It was really cool. So we did that. We soaked in the hot waters. We prepared ourselves. And then we met with the shaman 4 days later and did an ayahuasca ceremony, which was one of the most healing days of my life. Yeah. So that's all part of my journey also, just, you know.
Did you have an intention going in?
I just wanted to be present with the medicine and to learn from it. So I guess that was my intention.
Yeah. And any lessons or wisdom you'd share you care to share?
Well, one really strange thing and one just beautiful thing. I started crying uncontrollably because I just felt so much joy and love. And I was thinking a lot about my sister and her daughter. I have 2 boys. And the connection to all the females in my life and all the people that I love.
Yeah.
I just felt this very intense, loving connection to the plants. You know, you can when you're in that state of mind, you can see the plants breathing and being there for you and cleaning the air and healing the earth, and it just it's this cycle of energy you see everywhere that's so loving. There's the oneness, the connection, and it's beautiful. It is intensely beautiful. So that will always stick with me. There were many things that came up that night, but one interesting thing at the end of the practice, we started in the early afternoon and it lasted all afternoon, all evening, all night until the early morning. It's a long experience.
Yeah.
And lots of chanting and music and drumming and very, very beautiful. So at the very end of the practice, as we're leaving, she asked us to write in her book the biggest message that we received, because she was planning on writing a book. I don't know if she has, and in fact, she recently got very ill. But I remember what I wrote in the book, and it was the weirdest thing. As I was sort of in the peak of the experience, a woman who I met from Australia came over to me, and she had this like very large staff with a rattle at the top of it, and she was rattling over me, and she said, "From the stars to your heart, from the stars to your heart." Sorry. It's still like really intense. That's like such a simple saying, right? But in that moment, I literally felt all this energy from the stars coming to my heart. And in that moment, I saw myself holding 2 children. This is long before I thought about having kids.
Yeah.
In fact, at that time I thought, maybe I'm not going to ever have children. I don't know if that's my pathway. It was just this beautiful, beautiful chant that she chanted over me for a very long time. And all this energy came in and filled me up. And again, I was just crying in joy. And so I wrote down in the journal before we left that the medicine had told me that I would have twins. I thought I was supposed to have twin children.
Yeah.
Which I was like, this is bizarre.
Yeah.
And the minute I got home, which was also a little scary, there was a huge earthquake in Lima as I was flying out, and my flight was delayed, and I left shaky. I really left Peru shaky. And when I got home, my boyfriend at the time took me out to breakfast, and I'd been fasting, and I was like rail thin, and I'm like, I want a big waffle and some eggs over easy and some sausage, just like bring it all.
Yeah.
And they come out, and the waitress is like, this is so crazy, but when I was making your eggs, there was a double yolk.
Yeah.
And I just started crying. I'm like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for the babies. And my boyfriend at the time is like, what is going on? And he was very not into having children, and it was just very clear that like we weren't meant to be together, and so I broke up with him, and it was all good. We went beautiful separate ways. But after that, I really my life had shifted so much that I had to be by myself for a few years.
Yeah.
And so that was all here, and I was living actually down at that little white house at my brother's farm. And there's 2 rooms in there. One room was just all art studio for me, and I just painted every day, and I did my work, and that's when I started to also get into gardening. I always grew up on a farm, and my mom gardened, but I had never really planted things myself, and I started to get my hands dirty. I just had like 2 little raised beds. And now today I have a 1/4 acre garden.
Yeah.
It's all 100% organic, good food that I haven't got to this goal yet, but the next thing I'm manifesting is growing food for a year for my family. So working on many goals.
Yeah, that's an awesome intention.
Yeah, and then now also I have 2 boys. And so when I got pregnant with the first one, I literally went in like probably 4 or 5 times more than the average person. Like, no, really, like, can make sure, is it twins or is it one?
Yeah.
But my grandmother had 4 sets of twins, which is a lot of twins in the family. But I did not have twins, but I had my first son, and then literally like 4 or 5 months after him, I got pregnant right away. Yeah. And so we call them Oregon twins.
Yeah. Oregon twins.
They're back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're an Irish twin if you're born within the year of each other.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's 4 months for Oregon.
Well, they're a little over a year apart.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. So there's a lot. There's been a lot of strange things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're on your path for sure, and you definitely brought up a few passions between the art and or neuroscience as well. So you like balancing the spiritual with the analytical, and is that help for your own validation in the spiritual realm, like, or is it just 2 different passions that are balanced?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I honestly, it's a little both, because at first, out of college, it took me 3 years to get my master's, and that's like almost going full time. Yeah. It's pretty much a double major in psychology and art theory as it's applied to clinical practices. Yeah. So the big word you use as a therapist is evidence-based. Everything's evidence-based. Yeah. And when you go to get a job, they don't tell you this when you apply for graduate school. When you go to get a job as an art therapist, a lot of people are like, that's like woo-woo. You call it woo-woo. Yeah. And And it's not. I mean, if you're using the clinical practices, it's all evidence-based.
Yeah.
And so I did find myself at first really pumping up my resume, studying neuroscience, having these big words to explain how art therapy works to people.
Yeah.
I would do this big presentation on trauma and art therapy and talk about what happens to our memory, our implicit and explicit memory. So if your mind is like a computer, that would be like long-term and short-term memory.
Yeah.
When you experience a trauma, the memory gets fragmented. And instead of just going into the right folder in long-term or short-term, it goes into 10 folders that make no sense.
Yeah.
And so that's why when people are trying to process their trauma, like you hear about the veterans having flashbacks, nightmares, it's literally the brain trying to put that memory into the right folder, but it's still just not making sense. It's all fragmented. Now what art therapy and music therapy and movement therapy do is it uses your physical body, which many of our memories are stored in our physiology.
Yeah.
And it uses different parts of your brain than just our verbal capacity. And so your brain actually starts to re-assimilate the memory correctly. When you draw about it, do music about it, movement, the brain's like, okay, these things all happen to my body, brain, mind, heart, soul.
Yeah.
Put it back together. And healing, I describe healing as really just being able to file that memory away correctly.
Gotcha.
So oftentimes we're still left with scars from that experience, but we can now heal from it, move on, because it's no longer something the brain's spending all this time trying to figure out.
Yeah. So, do you believe something aside from verbal therapy is a necessary component in trauma relief?
Absolutely. And so that's like the second answer to that question you asked. I found myself trying to explain all these scientific reasonings to people that were only in the scientific world. I tried to speak their language. But I also found that if I became very rigid with my clients in these very clinical settings, they would progress, but only so far.
Yeah.
They weren't, like I was seeing people in workshops getting crazy amounts of healing in 2 hours through other means like hypnosis and energy work.
Yeah.
And so I started to realize my toolbox was pretty limited in the clinical world. And I found myself slowly getting trained in other things, as well as sort of stepping out of it.
Yeah.
And so today here at Lotus, when I practice with my clients privately, I just want to provide whatever tool works for them. And if it is more evidence-based clinical work, we'll go there. But I definitely find myself being more on the other side of the scale, you know, doing the intuitive art, the energy work, and hypnosis, letting people heal in these other organic ways, because there aren't a lot of us practitioners out there. It's important to have both. Yeah. So
I'd agree.
Yeah, I just kind of find myself going back and forth, but definitely being more towards the while I still feel rooted in some evidence-based practices, I try to just offer what people need.
Yeah, definitely. Somewhat related, but I was actually just kind of doing some research on the placebo effect today. And it's, you know, in so many instances, the very analytical mechanisms and tools that we have in place are less effective than the more ritualistic, you know, and so just by associating a ritual to something that maybe doesn't have anything that, you know, on paper wouldn't seem to make sense in some sort of healing or cause and effect relation, adding a ritual to it is actually seeming to carry a lot more of that weight and momentum, you know, in a process of something like healing. So it's pretty cool stuff.
It is, and I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And as for shamanism, So would you, during our therapy, before the chakra therapy, you use sage and fan down with feathers, everything that you've picked from the earth yourself. So it sounds like you incorporate some practices from native traditions and whatnot.
Yeah, so when I work with someone who comes in that wants more of an energetic, shamanic treatment, I definitely have certain things that I do and certain ways I practice that are very inspired by much of my reading through the Native American ceremonies, and I myself am a practitioner of the sweat lodges. And so I always sage first. That's very traditional. And I also usually offer tobacco, which I've also grown myself.
Nice.
And it's also the ancient Aztec ceremonial tobacco.
Okay.
So this is a strain of tobacco that's been used for ceremonies for thousands of years.
And what is that called?
It's just called ancient Aztec tobacco.
Cool.
Yeah, you can order it online.
All right.
The seeds are tinier than the tip of a needle. Very difficult to plant at the beginning. But once it starts to grow, it's a very hardy plant. It grows about 4 feet tall. Big, beautiful, broad leaves, and a very thick stem, and a pink flower at the top, pink or white, that smells like jasmine.
Wow.
It also doubles as keeping bugs out of your garden. It's like a natural insecticide. So I grow my own tobacco. Basically, when I do work with people, I want to know where everything's come from. Just like my food. I'm a farm-to-table person. When I practice energy work, I have to know everything's good energy.
Yeah.
So I grow my own tobacco organically. It has to dry and cure for at least a year before I can offer it to the spirits. But the Native American tradition is that you offer up the tobacco to the spirits, the ancestors, and you also acknowledge all the directions of the planet, the north, east, south, and west. And then I also acknowledge all the mountains around us, the sky, the sun, and the moon. Just basically creating a sacred space.
Yeah.
And making sure that if there is any other outside energy there, that we have their permission to do the work. So that's how we start. And then the saging is just the ancient ceremony of cleansing your own personal energy.
Yeah.
I use feathers I've collected myself. And actually this year I found my first eagle feather.
Yes.
Which is a really big deal to me.
Yeah.
I feel like really thankful. Like, I seriously have been looking for an eagle feather for 8 years.
Yeah.
8 years.
And it happened. Whereabouts?
It's crazy. I stopped to see Ryan.
Yeah.
He's working on this barn over here, and I just wanted to peek in and see the floor, and he has this light he's put in that's, every time he takes a video of it, the light just is so warm and beautiful. I want to see it in person. But they must have been on lunch break. So I walked around the back of the building. I saw the beautiful light. I looked down. Boom.
Wow.
Eagle feather.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so now I have an eagle feather. I mostly have turkey feathers and hawk and woodpecker.
Woodpecker.
I have some woodpeckers on my farm that have like these really beautiful neon orange feathers. And they leave them around for me.
Very cool. They're so thoughtful.
They're so sweet,
yeah.
Right? Little woodpeckers. So I start that way, and then depending on what the person needs, again, it's not a cookie cutter tradition. You work with the person however they need. One of my craziest stories, though, I'm more new to the energy work. I've only been practicing on clients energetically for almost 2 years now. And the art therapy is like 15 years. And partly because I just haven't felt like I had the right space to do it in.
Yeah.
And that when this space opened, it just felt so good here, and it was the right time to start. So I had a client come to me, and it's funny. The thing I found is oftentimes people will say one thing to me, I'm coming to you for this. And often it's generic, maybe like, I'm just feeling a little off and I need help with my energy, to feel, really well. It's funny, every time someone comes to me, they'll be saying these words, but I hear something else. I hear what they really need.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. And I also get these intense images right away as they're talking that don't match their words at all. And so a client came to me and she's saying this generic stuff, I'm a little off and I had this dispute with a friend and I want to shake that energy off. She's saying this to me and I'm thinking, you're trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
That came to me so vividly. There was not even anything remotely like what she was saying. And so we went to work, and I also practice Reiki. And so we did all our energy clearing at the beginning of the session, and we did some Reiki, and I do energy healing bowls. And then I have a variety of other tools, chakra stones, crystals, just depending on what the person needs. And so we went through our practice, and at the end, I always process with the person, and we close the circle before we leave. And we have a little time to just kind of, how did that feel for you? What came up for me? And sometimes I'll do a big write-up for people to keep also, because oftentimes very vivid imagery comes up.
Yeah.
And many, many times, this one time I was working with a client and I said, who is this man with the white beard? Why did he keep coming to me? Oh, well, that was my father, and da-da-da-da-da happened. It was like, I would have never known her dad looked that way.
Yeah.
So as I'm talking with this client, and I'd gotten that message, I'm trying to get pregnant, I didn't say anything to her about it at all.
Yeah.
But I was crying at the end of the session. This deep grief had left me. I had pulled it from her, and then it left me. And she had been through many, many hard times in her life, lost many, many people.
Yeah.
And she said she felt grief being pulled from her. And that's kind of all we processed. Because that was intense enough.
Yeah.
We were both crying, and it was like time to be done for the day.
Yeah.
So about 2 weeks later, I sat down to my journal, and she comes into my mind so vividly. And I'm kind of just doing some free drawing, and for some reason the infinity symbol comes up for me, but instead of the traditional infinity symbol, it was a third loop in the infinity symbol. So as if the energy was more infinite than infinity.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what is this weird symbol that's coming to me, and why is she in my mind? And then I think, this symbol means new life. And I messaged her in that very moment. I messaged her and I said, how are you feeling? What's going on? She said she just got out of the bathroom. And she had not told anyone. And she had a positive pregnancy test.
That's awesome.
That very moment.
Yeah.
And she had been trying for so long. It was like...
And that was a burden she was just carrying herself, though, that trying. And
yeah, and it was causing her great grief. Great grief, yeah, there's many things I could say about that, but it's personal stories. And so that in that moment, it literally took my breath away, Zach. I realized I don't need to put on this coding for people of this evidence-based blah blah blah.
Yeah.
They can think what they want.
Yeah.
I don't really care.
I love it.
It doesn't matter. If you know something works, you know it works.
Yeah.
If you find your own healing, you find your own healing. And you don't have to, have it in a box.
Yeah.
I don't fit in a box. I don't think many people do.
No. I mean, we're trying, but it's not to our benefit whenever we try fitting ourselves there. Because, we're meant to be expressive and free and, follow our intuition, which everything you've said tonight has been very intuitive. It sounds like you've always had a good connection there with your higher self, which is beautiful. So I do have one more question about the non-cookie cutter approach to therapy. During our chakra ceremony, I noticed you had taken more time on the solar plexus. Was there any reason for that, or?
It just felt right.
Yeah. Okay. Because I felt like that was, I don't want to say calculated, but intended,
It was.
Yeah.
And, normally I do my chakra meditation for an hour. And I used to go to a Buddhist center in Portland where I learned this particular technique.
Yeah.
And we would do some chanting at the beginning. It was very beautiful. The right room would chant and the left room would chant, and we kind of got into a meditative chanting state. And then the teacher would sit up front and guide us through the same chakra breathing technique that I walked you through.
Okay.
Which is when you breathe in through your nose, you breathe first into your throat chakra and you imagine the blue light emanating.
Yeah.
You hold that as long as it feels that you can stay there as long as you want or as quick as you want, but you need to make sure that you feel really cleared out in your throat chakra.
Yeah.
Then you take the breath down to your heart chakra, fill yourself with the green light, the solar plexus, the yellow light, the orange light, the root chakra, the red light. And then this is the most difficult part of this practice. As you're breathing that air in, you can kind of imagine a line going down and all the little light bulbs lighting up of your chakras. Then you hold the energy in your root, and then you push the energy up your spine.
Yeah.
So it's a type of Kundalini meditation.
Yeah, I know Tai Chi, they do the same thing. They circulate from the mouth down to the root and then back up the spine over the top of the crown and back around.
And in this particular one, you take the energy just out your crown chakra straight up.
Yeah.
So it's like, I kind of almost envision it as like a glass of water for your chakras.
Yeah.
Really refreshing. You're taking that drink and it's just flowing down and then spouting up like a beautiful fountain out and just cleansing you.
Yeah.
Rejuvenating you. But yeah, so I stop at certain places that feel like they need more work. And for whatever reason, we spent more time on the solar plexus today.
Yeah. And just wondering, maybe the solar plexus is a place where fear is stored? Or no, despair. I'm not exactly versed on it.
Right, it is, yeah. And I've got my little cheat sheet over here. This is a really cool book that I found that I've never seen anywhere else. It's called Nuclear Evolution. And it is quite scientific also, if you're interested in the science of the shaman and the chakras. It's a thick read. But, okay, in your solar plexus, the Sanskrit word is Manipura. It's closely related to your pancreas. It's a yellow light color. And it's associated with intellectual properties. I always associate it also with just like my core strength of myself, my core personality, who I am, and my center of myself. That's how I sort of explain it.
All right.
And so we did spend quite a bit of time on the throat chakra as well, just to kind of, I wanted to make sure what I spoke today was just as clear as I could be and connected as much as I could to love.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and just throwing it out there, I have loved our time together so far. And so typically I try to, at the end, tie together all the passions, the purpose, and the practices of presence, but everything there has been very intertwined. And I definitely, I recognized something as soon as I met you, and you've only further affirmed that through this conversation, that you have been able to align those things and, are walking your highest path. And I think that's the number one goal of this show, is just to teach people, show people, we have these ideas of what maybe success or happiness is, and oftentimes it's not true to ourselves because we're not aligning these three things. And I think you are a beautiful illustration of, someone that has done that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was really fun.
Yeah. And is there any parting words that you would like to, say to our audience, whether that be something that rings really true to you, any words of wisdom, or also where any causes that you support and you would like to inform everyone else of?
I think what I would want to leave everyone with, if they just take one thing from this talk, the literally most powerful tool we have is Ram Dass's words, be here now. That's all we have. We don't know how long we have on this planet, how much time we have. We don't know if there is an afterlife, if there are multiple lives we live. All we really have is this moment, and if we can just fully live right now and be present, that is the best we can do. And I feel like I can't even convey it fully, but just this being here now is so important.
Yeah.
That's what I want to leave everyone with.
I got tears in my eyes.
I can't believe you have that tattooed on your arm.
And the craziest thing is, I think out of 5 episodes, I've had 3 of those episodes where that moment has happened now, where those words are said, and so, and yeah, I absolutely agree, and that's the biggest thing that I think any of us has, is the present moment. There is nothing else, so.
If we act now, if we align ourselves with our true self now, everything is in place.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm just full of gratitude and love.
Well, thank you.
All right, friends. Well, join us next week, and I hope everybody has a beautiful day with much love and mindfulness in the present moment. Thank you.
Mwah.